Hey, everybody out there. Hope you're doing well. I want to talk to you about bearing your scars, wearing your scars. Now, scars are healed wounds, and I believe that we have to be healed of those times in the past where we've been hurt, abused, mistreated, so forth, so on, betrayed. You know, we have to have healing in our hearts, and healing is tough work. But what happens when a wound is healed, it becomes a scar. And those scars are really the badges, not only of our healing, but of the authority in the thing that we overcame. I often see people wanting to follow leaders who are very successful. And I get that. I mean, who wouldn't? You know, you don't want to learn about money from someone who's terrible with money. And you don't want to learn about raising your children from people who have never raised kids, right? You want to hear from people who have, to some degree, overcame and been successful in certain areas. But one of the things for me that I always look for is I look for leaders and mentors who walk with a limp. And when I say walk with a limp, I'm just looking for people who have been through something and have come out on the other side, not bitter, not angry. Because we've all seen the 60, 70-year-old Christians who, you know, they're still on milk. They still can't feed themselves. They're still immature in Christ. And it's worse when you see an old saint who's bitter and angry and critical. Oh my goodness. Is there anything more just completely disturbing than a born-again, blood-bought Christian who's upset, critical, and nasty and bitter at the world, at the church, at people? If there's one thing in my life I have endeavored to do, it is to not let myself be a joyless, bitter, cynical Christian. And we have a lot of them out there, right? Because the world will make you that way. Hey, even the church will make you that way. It's made like that. It's supposed to be that way. You know, God puts us in life, in church, in everything with people because we're going to grow. When we're around real people, we're going to experience, you know, their failures, their shortcomings, their defects. And sometimes that wears on us. And so even through other things in life, you know, walking through hardship, walking through trial, walking through suffering, or anything like that, I look for leaders who walk with a limp. You know, when I say that limp, I'm referencing Jacob, when Jacob wrestled with the Lord and the Lord touched his hip. And so Jacob, for the rest of his life, walked with a limp because he wrestled with God. I think it's funny when you think about that story. Joseph's wrestling with a man, but he does not recognize it's the Lord. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes I believe when we think we're fighting against people, circumstances, a business, a leader, a boss, whatever it may be, we're not really wrestling with flesh and blood. We're wrestling against the Lord who is behind those people, circumstances, and situations. Now, I'm not insinuating that God brings evil upon your life. But what I am saying is that God will use the evil brought upon your life for your good. Joseph was wrestling what he thought was a man, but come to find out he was wrestling against God all along. And because he was wrestling with God, God eventually touched that hip and caused him to walk with a limp. You know, I trust leaders who walk with a limp. I trust leaders who have walked with God and walked through suffering and come out on the other side of it joyful, happy, rejoicing, knowing that death doesn't end in death. It ends in resurrection. And so I want to talk to you about wearing your wounds, being transparent. We as leaders, we have got to get over this social media culture, right? This whole idea that we have to somehow be these people that only show our highlights, never show our weaknesses, never talk about our failures. Guys, our failures are actually what give us authority. Our tests that we've walked through are the things that people need to hear about. I mean, it encourages me to hear about leaders who have overcome. But what encourages me almost more is hearing from people who have failed. I remember sitting with a dear father in the Lord. It makes me laugh even to this day. I won't mention who it is. You'd surely know him, but I was sitting with him in Nashville one time eating lunch, and I was in a real rough season. And I said, hey man, do you ever just feel like giving up? Do you ever feel like quitting? And I was sheepishly asking because I thought he was going to say, I never give up. I'm in it to win it. I never have a bad day. I just pray and I fast. And I said, do you ever just feel like so weak you just want to give up? He said, only about once a week. And when he said that, it encourages me. It encouraged me in the moment and encourages me today. I love hearing from leaders who wear their scars, who talk about, man, I failed here. I failed in this. I messed this up. Because we learn from our failures much more than we do our successes. I love the old adage. It says, you never lose, you just learn. And that's true. Jesus even wore his scars. Hebrews 10:19 and 20 says that to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way that's been opened for us, the curtain that is his broken body. So Jesus' broken body is actually the access point of entry into intimacy with God, into the holy of holy places. We enter in through his brokenness. And I believe in the same way, when we open up our brokenness to people, when we let them know where we've failed, where we've struggled, and how we've walked through that, even in sometimes where there are no answers, but just mystery, it releases access into intimacy with God, and it releases access into intimacy, with one another, of course, too. Jesus actually didn't, when his resurrected body come forth, Jesus didn't make his scars disappear. Jesus wasn't resurrected and said, I'm going to totally erase the scars in my hands, the scars in my feet, the wound in my side. We think that God's healing sometimes looks like us completely forgetting about it, but that's not true healing. In fact, Jesus keeps his wounds after his resurrection. So in his glorified state, he still wears the scars of his earthly life. Know this, everything you've walked through, every circumstance, even the things you're fighting against right now, you might not be fighting against a person. You might not be fighting against a thing or a culture. You might actually be fighting against the Lord who's trying to teach you through this thing. In fact, when you're obedient, like Christ was, even to the point of death on the cross, those scars became the access point for others to enter into a relationship with God in a deeper way. In the same way, your scars give access for others to enter in to intimacy with the Lord in their own struggle, because they say, I've seen him go through this. He's walked through this. I know I can. Whenever I call my spiritual pops, I call him up. I say, hey man, we're going through this. And he'll say, oh, I've been there. And he'll tell me a story about when he walked through something similar or a similar circumstance. It never fails to absolutely encourage my heart to the furthest extent. I mean, I get lifted up. I get so hope-filled because I go, hey, he's been there. And so if he's walked that path, I can follow him as he's followed Christ. Think about this. Jesus presented his scars to his disciples, even to Thomas. We all know the story, who doubted. Jesus showed the scars in his hands to Thomas, and he invited him to see those scars. I want to tell you this, if we're willing to be transparent about past failures, past scars, past sufferings, wrestlings, all of that, we will give access for other people. We will give hope for other people in their own suffering, in their own stories, to walk with God in suffering. I think one of the most normal things that happens in times of confusion, hardship, when we're walking through tough things, and really when our will is just dying and we're surrendering to the will of God, that's often it feels like death. And it is that. But when we're walking through that, we often don't see the Lord in it. I think that's one of the hardest things, is that when we don't see the Lord in the situation, when it seems so hopeless, so dire, and we go, where is God? When we hear from others who have walked through their own things, suffering, whatever, when we hear from them, it imparts hope to us that in the same way they can now look back and see that God was with them, we can see God with us now in our own suffering. I want to encourage you, Don't hide your scars. Be transparent about your failures. Tell those people you're leading, you're discipling. Tell friends, tell others, hey, don't just tell them your successes. Tell them your failures. You know what has encouraged me more than anything? Man, when I see Bill Johnson get on and say, I prayed for hundreds of people before anyone, was ever healed. When I hear Reinhard Bonnke talking about trying to get people saved and couldn't lead a soul to the Lord, but then eventually led millions. Guys, these are the stories we need to hear because we need to know we can't despise the day of small beginning. We can't see our life separated from the Lord. He's in our life. And when we hear others have walked through it, we go, oh yeah, I can do it too. It gives us permission to see the Lord in our own suffering, in our own wrestle, in our own story. Wear your scars, wear your wounds. Don't run from them. God has given those tests so that he could give you authority. Those scars are actually a badge of authority that you have overcome, and you can now set others free by giving them hope in their own struggle and their own wrestle. So I bless you guys. Hey, if you haven't heard about this yet, we have our Pioneers of His Presence mentorship community now live. I'm going to be mentoring you. We're going to get together. We're going to get real, authentic. It's a thing that's growing day by day, week by week. We're adding new stuff all the time. Courses, exclusive teachings you only get there. Podcasts, interviews you only get in the community, okay? So you want to ask questions. You want to, open up your life, and I'll open up mine, and we're just going to come in and try to help you navigate seasons, help you navigate where you're at, maybe help you be equipped or grow into the place that God might be calling you to go. We're going to cover everything and everything in between. So check that out if you haven't already. Like and subscribe, and I will see you guys soon.